The colony was quiet, almost too quiet for a place that carried so much importance. It was small, peaceful, and far from the busy routes where most human ships traveled. People who lived there often joked that the rest of humanity forgot about them. They didn't mind it, though. The calm gave them space to think, study, and breathe away from the crowded cities of Earth and other major worlds. Most people on the colony worked in research. They spent their days studying strange signals in space, tracking cosmic storms, and collecting data that other scientists depended on. Life moved slowly, like the gentle rhythm of a small town. Everyone knew each other. Everyone felt safe. The mornings usually started with the soft hum of machines turning on, followed by the sound of teams moving through the corridors, checking readings, or preparing equipment. Some people went outside to observe the sky, which always looked brighter than any sky on Earth. Others stayed inside, carefully noting every small change in cosmic patterns. Even though the work was important, no one felt rushed. It was a place where people could do serious science without the pressure of large institutions breathing down their necks. But on one particular morning, the calm felt strange. It wasn't anything big, just a feeling people couldn't explain. The machines were working normally. The sky looked beautiful, as always. The data screens showed familiar patterns. Still, something felt slightly off, as if the air carried a whisper no one could hear fully. People continued their tasks, telling themselves it was nothing. After all, strange feelings were common in isolated places. Sometimes isolation played tricks on the mind, but as the day progressed, the feeling grew stronger. A few workers began noticing unusual readings. They appeared for a few seconds, then vanished. At first, they assumed it was a glitch. The equipment on the colony was old, not because no one cared, but because repairs took time when you lived so far from the core worlds. A small glitch wasn't unusual, but then it happened again, and again. Signals flickered like distant lights in fog. People exchanged unsure looks, but didn't panic. They followed protocol. Check the systems, run tests, stay calm. That was what they always did. One of the senior researchers, a quiet and thoughtful person known for staying calm in every situation, suggested they run a full scan of nearby space. Not because they expected danger, but because they wanted clarity. A calm mind needed answers. The scan results came slowly. The machine wasn't designed for fast readings. It hummed softly, taking its time, as if it also sensed something important was coming. When the data finally appeared, it showed something unusual, an object far away, but moving with clear direction. At first, they assumed it was a ship, but the readings didn't match any known human design, nor any of the familiar trading species. Still, they didn't panic. Strange objects appeared in space all the time. Most turned out to be harmless. Old satellites drifting for centuries. Small asteroids covered in metal-like minerals. Or pieces of ancient debris lost from forgotten explorations. They watched the object for a while, taking notes. It continued moving toward the colony, slow enough not to cause fear, but steady enough to keep everyone alert. The senior researcher called for a communication check. Maybe it was a visiting group that forgot to send a message. Maybe their equipment was failing. Maybe the object wasn't a ship at all. They needed confirmation. The communication officer tried sending signals. Once, twice, a third time. No response. People didn't like that. Even the most remote visitors always replied, even if only with a basic signal received. While they waited for another reply, the colony's normal routine began breaking apart. People paused their work, stared at the screens, and whispered questions none of them could answer. It wasn't fear yet. It was more like an uncomfortable curiosity. Some people stepped outside to look at the sky. There was nothing unusual visible with the naked eye, but they stood there anyway, hoping the fresh air would clear their minds. Others stayed inside, focusing on screens as if their eyes could force the unknown to reveal itself. Hours passed, and the object continued approaching. The strange feeling that started in the morning grew heavier, like a quiet pressure on everyone's chest. People still tried to remain calm, but now no one joked. No one made small talk. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was tense. When the next scans came in, something new appeared. The single object had become 2, then 3, then 5, all traveling the same route. That was the moment the colony realized something was truly wrong. Emergency protocols existed, but they were rarely used. Most people never imagined they would need them. Still, the senior researcher ordered everyone to gather in the main room. Updates were shared. People exchanged worried looks. The unknown objects kept coming closer, forming a pattern that was clearly intentional. Now the colony's communication systems were fully active, sending distress signals to every channel available. The officer repeated messages every few minutes, hoping someone, anyone, would respond. Still nothing came back. The colony was small, but its people were brave. Instead of panicking, they organized themselves. Some monitored space. Some checked equipment strength. Some secured shelters and backup systems. Even with fear rising, they moved with purpose. As the objects came closer, details became clearer. They weren't natural. They weren't debris. They weren't familiar vessels. They moved with too much precision and in perfect formation. The colony's power flickered slightly, just for a moment. People looked up sharply. Flickers like that only happened when something interfered with the energy field surrounding the settlement. And then the communication panel flashed. A signal, weak, broken, but clearly from someone outside. For a moment, hope filled the room. But the message was too faint to understand. Just a few distorted sounds, fragments of words, mixed with heavy static. Nobody could decode it. Still, even that brief signal meant that someone out there received their distress call. People tried not to think about whether the help would arrive in time. The objects were close now. Very close. The colony sensors predicted they would reach the outer perimeter within minutes. The senior researcher ordered everyone to stay inside and prepare all emergency systems. The machines hummed louder. Lights flickered again. People stood still, listening to the sounds of their own breathing, and then everything changed. The sky outside flashed with a strange glow, not bright, not loud, but eerie, like the color wasn't natural. Inside the colony, all screens went blank for a second before switching to error signals. The communication panel froze. The colony had never experienced anything like that before. People rushed from one station to another, trying to reboot systems. Some machinery responded. Some didn't. The emergency lights turned on, painting the rooms with a soft red glow. No one spoke for several seconds. It felt like time paused. Outside, the strange glow faded slowly, leaving the sky disturbing and unfamiliar. When the screens finally returned, they showed something shocking. The unknown objects were no longer distant shapes. They were right at the colony's perimeter. People stared at the screens in silence, hearts pounding. The machines struggled to keep their displays stable. No one knew what these objects intended, but everything inside them told them that their small, peaceful research outpost was facing something far beyond anything they had been trained to handle. Few people whispered short prayers. Others stood quietly, trying to stay steady. The senior researcher took a deep breath, reminding everyone to stay calm and follow protocol. But even with all their training, the deep, overwhelming feeling inside the room was unmistakable. The colony was no longer safe. The unknown had finally arrived at their doorstep. And whatever happened next would forever change not only their lives, but the fate of every human settlement across the stars. When the distress signals finally reached the wider human network, they were nothing more than broken pieces of sound and blurry flashes of static. Still, they carried enough information to shake every person who listened to them. The messages were short, unclear, and filled with sudden cuts, like someone tried to speak, but the words were swallowed halfway. Yet the fear inside those fragments was unmistakable. Across different stations, ships, and civilian hubs, people paused whatever they were doing. They replayed the signals again and again, hoping they misheard something. But every replay felt worse than the last. Some people lowered the volume because even the static felt heavy. Others stared at the screens with disbelief, trying to understand what could have happened to a colony that was always peaceful. Out in the larger human worlds, nobody expected trouble from that region of space. The colony had no enemies, no disputes, not even a history of accidents. It was a symbol of calm routine. That's why the distress signals created such a deep shock. Nothing about them made sense. The first official response came from a monitoring center in one of the central systems. The officers there immediately forwarded the signals to higher authorities and sent out alerts to nearby ships. Soon, reports started appearing all across the human network. People began to ask questions. What happened? Why was the message so broken? Was it a technical failure or something else? Civilian forums buzzed with conversations. Families who had loved ones on the colony waited anxiously for updates. Scientists who once worked there sent messages to the authorities asking for clarification, but received none. Everyone wanted answers, but the only truth available was a few seconds of distorted sound and a bright flash that appeared in the background of the recordings. Broadcasters rushed to gather information, but even they struggled because no official source wanted to make assumptions. Some broadcasters hinted might be a cosmic storm. Others suggested an unexpected system failure. But the people who listened closely to the distress signals knew those explanations didn't feel right. There was something in the tone of the voices. Something urgent, something scared. The higher councils gathered in emergency meetings. They played the signals on large screens, pausing, zooming, enhancing audio, doing everything they could to understand the situation. They listened to the trembling voices hidden behind waves of interference. They studied the split-second images that showed the sky turning strange colors. They watched the lights flicker inside the colony buildings. They saw the shapes of unknown objects approaching in the far distance. Every new detail made the air inside the meeting rooms grow heavier. Some council members immediately pushed for a rescue mission. Others argued they needed more information before sending ships into unknown danger. No one wanted to create panic, but no one wanted to ignore the warning signs either. Meanwhile, the public kept asking the same question. Why was the colony targeted? Slowly, rumors began to spread. Some said the colony discovered something they weren't supposed to find. Others thought a new species had appeared in that part of space. A few claimed it had to be a natural event, but were unable to explain how a natural event could move information, like the objects shown in the scans. Families lined up outside communication centers, hoping for updates. People sat in waiting rooms, silent, staring at screens that repeated the same message. Investigation in progress. Every hour that passed without news felt longer than the last. Then came the first breakthrough. A team of specialists studying the distress signals uncovered a clear energy signature inside the recordings. It wasn't human-made. It belonged to a species known for peaceful trade, but not known for traveling anywhere near the colony. At first, experts thought this species might have been passing by and accidentally crossed paths. But deeper analysis showed something strange. Their signature didn't appear in any friendly pattern. It looked like something more organized, more focused. The specialists sent their findings to every major human fleet. That's when the situation shifted from confusion to fear. Reports came in from other outer colonies, strange signals, sudden equipment interference, and faint shadows on long-range scanners. Nothing as severe as what happened to the research colony, but similar enough to raise alarms. The news spread like a spark in dry grass. People began preparing for the worst. Travel routes adjusted. Ships moved cautiously. Families living in outer stations double-checked safety systems. The sense of peace humans used to feel in space slowly faded. On one busy civilian station, passengers stopped in the middle of their routines to watch a live broadcast. The screen displayed a map of human-settled space with blinking red, May RKS, showing where suspicious activity had been detected. The blinking points were scattered but unmistakably connected. People whispered among themselves, worry growing in every voice. The government could no longer stay silent. A public statement was finally released. It explained that the colony's distress signals had been received and were being analyzed. It confirmed that unknown objects were detected near the colony before the communication blackout. It assured the public that a task force was being prepared to investigate the situation. The message ended with a promise that every possible measure was being taken to ensure safety. But even with those words, many people felt uneasy. They could see the worry in the officials' eyes. They could hear the carefulness in their tone. It didn't feel like a normal announcement. It felt like something larger was happening behind the scenes, something everyone could sense, but couldn't fully understand. In private meetings, the truth began to take shape. The officials compared the new findings with old records. They analyzed old space routes. They checked every species known in that region. None of them had any reason to target humans. None had any history of conflict. But the energy patterns found in the recordings didn't match peaceful contact. They didn't match accidental encounters. They matched something organized, something intentional. This realization made the room fall quiet. Humanity had always tried to maintain respectful friendships with other species. They traded, they shared knowledge, they worked together on large projects. Humans always believed communication could solve most problems. For decades, it worked, but this time felt different. The experts studying the patterns said it looked like the colony wasn't attacked randomly. It was selected, chosen. Someone purposely moved toward it. But the biggest question still remained: why? Across the network, different organizations began preparing response plans. Engineers worked to strengthen communication relays. Pilots volunteered to join long-distance scouting missions. Scientists gathered old research logs from the colony to see if they recorded anything unusual before the blackout. Meanwhile, the families who lost contact waited in painful silence. They checked their devices every few minutes, hoping to see a message or hear a familiar voice. Even people who didn't have relatives there felt heavy in their hearts. Humanity had lost a piece of itself, and nobody knew the full story yet. As more experts studied the debris scans sent through the distress signals, they noticed something alarming. The unknown objects were not simple vessels. They carried patterns that suggested advanced technology that didn't match any known species. This discovery made the investigation grow even more intense. Soon, all the highest security councils were called together. Inside the room, the lights were dimmed, and multiple screens displayed the last clear image recovered from the colony. It showed the sky glowing in unnatural colors. Behind that glow were silhouettes faint but unmistakable. They were shaped like structures, not asteroids. They formed a coordinated pattern, almost like they were communicating silently. A soft gasp spread through the room. The officials exchanged serious looks. They understood what this meant. Something far more deliberate was happening. Humanity realized the colony wasn't struck by accident. It was targeted, and if the attackers reached that colony once, Nothing stopped them from reaching another dot. The leaders knew they had to respond quickly, but also wisely. Acting without thinking could bring danger to other human settlements. But doing nothing would risk repeating the same tragedy. A special task force was formed, gathering experts from science, security, exploration, and communication fields. They were assigned to uncover the truth, find out who or what approached the colony, and prevent it from happening again. The process would take time, but the message was clear. Humanity could no longer ignore the signs. Across every human world, the shock of the colony's loss brought people together in a way no announcement ever had. Civilians prayed for the missing. Scientists worked nonstop. Pilots prepared their ships. Families held on to hope, even when the uncertainty felt unbearable. The silence from the colony became a symbol, one that told humanity something important. Single colony was taken from them, and the reason behind it was something the entire human race needed to uncover before it was too late. The task force worked day and night, reviewing every piece of information they had collected so far. Even though they were some of the most skilled people from different fields, science, exploration, communication, engineering, they all felt the same feeling pressing on their shoulders. It was the weight of uncertainty. No one knew what they were truly searching for, only that the answers were somewhere out there, hidden in the quiet corners of space. The first step for the task force was to gather all the fragments from the colony's final transmission. There were broken video clips, stretched out sound waves, damaged signal bursts, and incomplete energy readings. The team spread them out on large screens, replaying every piece over and over. They slowed down the images until each frame looked like a painting. They separated audio into thin lines, analyzing each vibration. They mapped the shape of every shadow in the recording. At first, it felt like they were staring at a giant puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. Some pieces didn't fit anywhere. Some looked like they belonged to two different places at once, but the team kept going. Step by step, hour by hour, they began connecting the dots. One of the biggest clues came from a tiny piece of energy data that looked useless at first. It was nothing more than a thin spike on a long graph. But when the team enhanced it, something interesting appeared. The spike wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern, like someone knocking faintly on a distant wall. The rhythm showed direction. It didn't match natural energy sources. It didn't match human technology. It was deliberate. That one pattern was enough for the task force to trace the possible flight path of the unknown objects. They followed the faint line the energy left. Behind, stretching across the dark space like a trail only machines could see. The path led to a region of space that barely appeared in human records. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't populated either. It was a long, quiet stretch filled with dust clouds, small frozen rocks, and drifting signals that no one had cared to explore deeply. No one imagined anything important could exist there. For years, people simply passed by it like a forgotten road on a map. But now, the forgotten road had become the center of everything. The task force informed the human councils about the discovery. The councils met again, this time with more urgency. They studied the new findings carefully, aware of how important each detail was. The debate that followed lasted hours. Some leaders wanted immediate action. Others urged caution. They knew they couldn't repeat past mistakes where quick decisions created bigger problems. Eventually, a decision was made. A fleet would be sent to investigate the trail, not a large military fleet, but a mixed team, a combination of science vessels, patrol ships, long-range scanners, and communication specialists. The goal wasn't to start a fight. It was to understand what happened and prevent another tragedy. When the announcement reached the public, people felt a mix of hope and fear. They were glad action was being taken, but the idea of sending humans closer to the unknown made their hearts uneasy. Families of the lost colony members watched the news with teary eyes, whispering silent prayers. Workers on busy stations paused to listen to the broadcast. Even young students followed the story, asking their teachers what it meant. Soon the fleet prepared for departure. Engineers checked every system, every wire, every battery. Pilots ran simulations over and over, practicing calm responses to unpredictable situations. Scientists packed their tools, scanners, and portable labs. Even communication officers carried backup equipment, knowing the unknown could interfere with signals again. When the day of departure finally arrived, the docks were filled with people watching silently. The ship slowly rose, lights glowing softly, engines humming like deep breaths. They formed a calm formation, and then disappeared into the dark. Inside the fleet, the atmosphere was serious but hopeful. No one spoke loudly. Everyone knew what was at stake. They traveled for days through familiar space, then through quieter zones where fewer ships passed. After that, the journey entered a region so empty that the stars themselves felt distant. On one of the ships, a scientist stared at the empty window for a long time. The stars looked tiny, like scattered diamonds. She whispered to herself, hoping the colony survivors, if any remained, could hear the echoes of help coming their way. The fleet followed the faint energy trail closely. It twisted and curved, almost as if someone tried to hide the path. Each curve made the team more convinced that the unknown objects hadn't simply wandered. They had moved with reason. As they continued further, they encountered something unexpected. A small outpost belonging to another species. It was abandoned. No signs of life, no damage. But the machines inside were silent, as if someone had switched them off and walked away. Dust floated in the air. Tools lay unused. Screens were dark. The fleet crew examined every corner, feeling the same uneasy quiet that the human colony must have felt before the blackout. This discovery changed the mission immediately. It meant the human colony wasn't the only place touched by the unknown. The fleet recorded everything and shared the information with human leaders. The officials back home grew even more serious. Messages were sent to allied species, warning them that something unusual was happening in the outer regions. The fleet continued their journey with increased caution. As they moved deeper into the quiet region, they encountered more strange signs. Frozen pieces of metal drifting alone. Faint heat signatures that faded the moment scanners tried to lock on. Energy waves that appeared for seconds and then vanished as if reacting to the fleet's presence. The deeper they went, the more they sensed they were being watched. No one said it out loud, but the tension inside the ships grew heavy. The hum of the engines felt louder. The blinking lights on control panels seemed more urgent. Even the air inside the cabins felt colder. Finally, after days of following the strange trail, they reached the edge of a large dust cloud. It was thick, almost like a curtain. The scanners struggled to read beyond it. Signals bounced back noisily. The fleet had to slow down. They debated whether to enter the cloud. It could hide anything harmless or dangerous. But turning back wasn't an option. Too many questions depended on what lay inside. After a silent moment, the decision was made. The fleet moved forward. Inside the dust cloud, visibility dropped sharply. Lights reflected off swirling particles. The ships navigated slowly, trusting their instruments more than their eyes. The deeper they went, the quieter the universe felt, as if even sound refused to pass through the dust. Then something changed. The scanners suddenly picked up large shapes, structures floating just beyond the thick layers. At first, the shapes looked like shadows. But as the ships moved closer, the shadows sharpened. The structures were enormous. They didn't match human designs. They didn't match any known species. They looked ancient, built from materials no one recognized. Some were shaped like towers lying on their sides. Others looked like huge walls with hollow centers. They floated silently, like forgotten monuments. The fleet held its breath. Nothing moved. Nothing reacted. The structures seemed empty, abandoned, lifeless. Yet the energy patterns surrounding them felt wrong, like echoes of something still lingering. One of the ships scanned deeper and found something even more surprising. Beneath the structures, hidden behind layers of dust, there were trails thin, barely visible, but present. Trails left by the same unknown objects that visited the human colony. This was their origin point. The fleet realized they were standing at the doorstep of whoever or whatever had approached the colony. But the biggest shock came when a communications specialist noticed a pattern hidden between the energy waves surrounding the structure's dot. It wasn't random noise. It was a signal. Faint, buried, almost erased, but a signal. The specialist enhanced it. Slowly, the sound became clearer. It wasn't human. It wasn't any known language. But it had structure, rhythm, meaning. Someone had been sending messages through these abandoned structures. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And the human fleet had finally stepped into the place where the truth would reveal itself. The fleet stayed still for a long moment, almost as if every person inside every ship needed time to understand what they were looking at. The ancient structures floating in the dust cloud felt unreal, like pieces of an abandoned world left behind by someone who never planned to return. Even though no movement came from them, they created a strange pressure in the air. As if they were holding secrets nobody was meant to see. Inside the lead ship, the communication team kept working on the strange signal they picked up earlier. The sound was weak, buried under layers of static, but the rhythm inside, it never broke. It repeated itself like a slow heartbeat. The more the team listened, the more it felt like someone had tried to hide the message inside the dust cloud, but never fully erased it. Some officers thought the signal might be a trap. Others believed it was a warning, or maybe even a leftover message from the group behind the colony attack. The uncertainty made everyone tense. People spoke quietly, choosing their words carefully, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something invisible nearby. The fleet sent small drones forward to scan the structures more closely. The drones moved like silent fireflies, weaving through the dust. Their lights showed the scale of the object's huge walls with smooth surfaces, long tunnels with open ends, circular frames that looked like broken rings. Some pieces were so large they cast shadows over the dust clouds below. The deeper the drones went, the clearer it became that these structures didn't belong to any species humans knew. They were old, not just a few hundred years old, but possibly thousands. Their surfaces had scratches and patches of worn metal. Their edges were uneven, almost as if they had been damaged in some long-forgotten conflict. The scientists on the fleet quietly discussed what these structures might have been used for. Some thought they were communication towers. Others believed they could be old transportation gates. A few wondered if they were part of a lost civilization that disappeared long before humans ever reached space, but none of these guesses explained why the unknown objects from the colony had come from this place. The fleet decided to send a closer team, a small group of explorers, scientists, and engineers to examine the structures directly. They boarded a shuttle, checked their protective suits, and prepared for the unknown. Before departure, the leader of the group took a deep breath, looked at the rest of the team, and said something simple yet heavy. They were not going to fight anyone. They were going to understand. The shuttle left the ship and slowly approached the largest structure. Dust swirled around them like floating mist. The structure's surface was dark, almost black, and it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. When they touched down, the ground felt solid but rough under their boots, as if the material wasn't metal or stone, but something in between. The team spread out carefully, scanning every inch. They found small patterns engraved into the wall's lines, circles, symbols none of which matched anything in known databases. Another group discovered a narrow opening leading inside. It felt risky, but they had come too far to turn back. The inside of the structure felt different. The air was colder. The floor vibrated slightly under their steps, though nothing moved. Light beams from their suits revealed long empty hallways, silent chambers, and curved passageways. Everything felt abandoned, yet some parts still hummed faintly, like a heart trying to keep beating after a long sleep. One of the engineers noticed something strange on a wall, a smooth section with faint lights arranged like tiny dots. When he placed his hand close to the surface, the dots glowed brighter, responding to the heat of his skin. He called the team over. They watched the dots form a pattern, a cluster of lights shaping into a map-like design. The team recorded everything. Suddenly, the signal they had been studying became clearer, just for a moment. The comm units inside their helmets picked up the same slow rhythm, repeating in the same pattern as before. It startled everyone. It felt as if the structure itself had reacted to their presence. The message was not in any known language, but the emotion inside the sound was unmistakable. It didn't feel hostile. It felt like a warning. The team returned to the shuttle with all their findings. When they reconnected with the main fleet, the officers listened to the recorded signal with faces full of concentration. They enhanced it again, adding the new data collected by the drones and explorers. That's when a surprising truth became clear. Structures were not built by the group that attacked the colony. They were older, far older. The unknown attackers had used this place as a base or hiding spot, but they didn't create it. They merely took advantage of what was already here. This realization changed the tone of the entire mission. The attackers belonged to a more modern group, organized, strategic, and technologically advanced, but they were not ancient. They had chosen this place because it was remote and forgotten. The fleet wondered if the attackers lived here or if they merely used it temporarily. They needed answers. The leaders of the fleet gathered their top advisors in a meeting room. They discussed the next steps, weighing risks and possibilities. Some wanted to search deeper into the structures, hoping to find more traces of the attackers. Others worried that going too deep might activate old systems they didn't understand. Meanwhile, back in human space, officials held another high-level meeting. They debated how humanity should respond to the situation. Some believed retaliation was necessary. Others insisted humanity must avoid starting a conflict without knowing the full truth. A few argued that communication with nearby species was essential to prevent misunderstandings. The biggest concern was that more colonies might be targeted. To calm the public, officials increased patrols around human settlements. More ships were placed on standby. Engineers set up early warning systems. Space routes were re-evaluated to avoid risky areas. Civilians were encouraged to report any strange signals or sightings. Even though everything was handled calmly, the fear was growing. People avoided traveling too far. Families stayed close. Workers on distant stations checked their equipment more often. There was a sense of quiet tension in every human world. Back on the fleet, the exploration team continued their scans. They found new clues, energy readings leading deeper into the dust cloud. The readings suggested that the attackers had recently passed through this region. The trail was still warm. This changed the mission again. The fleet could no longer only study the structures. They had to follow the attackers' path to understand their intentions. But before the fleet could move, something unexpected happened. One of the smaller ships picked up a new signal. It wasn't old like the previous one. It was recent. Active. The rhythm inside was sharper, quicker, like footsteps instead of a heartbeat. It repeated in patterns that felt coded, as if someone was sending instructions. When the communication officers compared this new signal with the old one, they realized the new one didn't belong to the ancient structures. It belonged to the attackers. Everyone in the fleet froze with attention. The attackers were not far. Perhaps they were watching. Perhaps they were waiting. Perhaps they had sensed the fleet entering the dust cloud. The communication officers tried to decode the signal, but couldn't crack it fast enough. The fleet used long-range scanners to search for movement. For a few minutes, nothing appeared. Then, faint shadows flickered on the edge of their scanners. Not fully visible, not fully solid, just shadows moving quickly between the pillars of dust. They didn't approach. They didn't attack. They simply watched, keeping distance, almost testing the fleet's patience. The fleet debated whether to chase the shadows or wait. After a long discussion, they decided not to pursue. Chasing could trigger a reaction they weren't ready for. They needed to understand, not escalate. More experts joined the meeting, studying every detail of the new signal. Slowly, they noticed something chilling. The signal didn't only send instructions. It also scanned the area. It was mapping the fleet's positions. Someone was gathering information about them. The fleet strengthened its defenses immediately. Shields were raised. Patrol drones were released. Communication frequencies were encrypted. Every pilot remained at their post. No one allowed the tension to show on their face. But everyone felt it in their chest. Meanwhile, the task force continued analyzing the ancient structures, hoping the old technology held answers about who once lived here and why the attackers chose this place. More clues emerged. Some parts of the structures contained old symbols that looked like warnings or records. Others contained faint energy signatures, similar to early forms of communication. The deeper the fleet studied, the more they understood that the ancient builders might have left behind information about the threats they once faced. Maybe the same threat had returned. The fleet realized something important. The attackers were not acting randomly. They were planning something. And if humanity didn't uncover the full truth soon, more colonies could be in danger. This was no longer a simple investigation. It was a race against time. And humanity had only begun to see the first layer of the danger waiting behind the dust cloud. The fleet moved carefully through the dust cloud, fully aware that someone or something was observing them. The shadows on the scanners had disappeared, but the energy signals continued to pulse faintly in the distance. Everyone on board felt a quiet tension, the kind that settles deep inside and makes even the simplest tasks feel heavy. No one spoke loudly. Every movement was deliberate. Every command measured. The exploration team had learned much from the ancient structures, but now they realized that knowledge alone was not enough. Understanding the past could give clues, but it could not stop the unknown attackers from moving toward other colonies. The fleet had to act, but they also had to be patient. Patience was hard, especially when lives hung in the balance. Days passed, and every hour brought new observations. The faint shadows appeared again, briefly flickering in the periphery of long-range scanners. They never came closer, never attacked, but their presence was a constant reminder that the attackers were still active. Analysts on the ships worked around the clock, translating data into maps, charts, and possible trajectories. The goal was to predict the attackers' next move, to prevent any more human settlements from being targeted. The fleet scientists discovered a pattern in the attackers' movements. Every few cycles, the unknown objects followed similar routes, returning to specific points in the dust cloud before moving on. It was almost as if they were checking on something, maintaining control over areas humans didn't yet understand. The fleet realized that the attackers were not just aggressive, they were careful. They had a plan, and that plan had a clear goal. Humanity's leaders back home followed every update. While the fleet gathered data, governments began preparing for the possibility of a larger conflict. They strengthened defenses around colonies, improved communication networks, and coordinated with allied species to watch for suspicious activity. People worked tirelessly, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Every civilian, every technician, every pilot understood that their actions could prevent another tragedy. Inside the fleet, the tension gradually shifted from fear to determination. The fleet had already survived uncertainty and mystery. They had navigated through dust clouds, explored ancient structures, and collected more information than anyone thought possible. Now, they were ready for the next step, to uncover the truth behind the attacks and ensure humanity's safety. The first breakthrough came when the fleet detected an energy trail leading away from the dust cloud. It was stronger than anything recorded before, consistent with the technology observed in the original colony attack. The trail moved toward a hidden system, long forgotten on human maps. It was remote, isolated, and difficult to reach, but the fleet had no choice. If they followed it, they might finally discover the source of the attacks. Pilots prepared for the journey, engines humming steadily. Scientists adjusted instruments, ensuring that every sensor was calibrated for unexpected readings. Communication officers strengthened links, prepared for interference, and encrypted every signal. Everyone knew that the upcoming journey was risky, but it was necessary. The fate of countless colonies depended on what they would find. After days of travel, the fleet reached the edge of the hidden system. Stars here seemed faint, almost distant, as if the light had traveled farther than anywhere else in known space. The scanners showed structures similar to the dust cloud, but these were more complex, larger, and clearly designed for control rather than habitation. They were the perfect base for the attackers, organized, strategic, and hidden. The fleet paused, studying the area carefully. The shadows flickered again on the long-range scanners. This time, the shapes were more defined. The unknown attackers had returned, observing the fleet as if evaluating whether to engage or retreat. The tension on board rose, but leaders reminded the crew that understanding the attackers was more important than confrontation. They were here to protect, not to provoke. Exploration drones were deployed again, carefully scanning every structure. The data revealed hidden chambers, energy nodes, and control systems, tools for monitoring space far beyond the dust cloud. It was clear now that the attackers had been watching not only the human colony, but also multiple regions, possibly other species as well. Their goal had been to create chaos, to strike fear, and to destabilize entire sectors. While analyzing the systems, the fleet discovered traces of the attackers' planning records stored in encrypted energy logs. The logs revealed that the original human colony had been targeted because it was isolated and unprotected. The attackers assumed no one would respond quickly. They had not counted on humanity's ability to coordinate rapidly across vast distances. The realization gave the fleet clarity. The attacks were strategic, yes, but the attackers were not invincible. Their reliance on the structures and energy trails made them predictable. Humanity now had the advantage of understanding their methods. Every move the attackers made left a trace, and the fleet could use those traces to anticipate future actions. The communication specialists worked tirelessly to decode more of the logs. Pieces of information emerged, movement patterns, energy signals, and warnings encoded within the data. Though the language was not human, the rhythm, repetition, and logic made the message understandable to the trained minds on board. The attackers had been trying to maintain control over the region, using fear as a tool. But humanity's investigation turned the situation upside down. The attackers were now being observed, studied, and understood. With this knowledge, the fleet was ready to act strategically. They did not plan to attack blindly. Instead, they used the energy logs and patterns to disable the attackers' monitoring systems. Tiny drones, guided by careful calculations, interfered with power nodes cutting off surveillance without revealing the fleet's presence. One by one, the structures became inactive, silent, and harmless. As the attacker system shut down, the fleet discovered one final clue. A small chamber hidden deep within the largest structure contained the original signal source that had disrupted the human colony. It was an automated device, programmed to project fear and confusion, but not to engage physically. The attackers had relied on it to create chaos remotely. Humanity's fleet had now neutralized it. The realization was profound. Humanity had not destroyed the attackers directly. Instead, they had used intelligence, observation, and patience to dismantle the threat without unnecessary violence. The fleet had revealed the attackers' methods, taken control of their systems, and prevented further harm. It was a victory achieved through understanding rather than confrontation. Returning home, the fleet carried not only data, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Reports and analysis from the mission were shared with governments, scientists, and civilian organizations across human space. The knowledge gained would help protect other colonies, prevent similar threats, and strengthen communication networks for decades to come. The lost colony was memorialized. Its story became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of careful action. Though its people could not be saved, their experience inspired new strategies, safety measures, and a sense of unity across humanity. Every memorial, ceremony, and tribute honored not only the lives lost, but also the hope and determination that carried humanity forward. Leaders reflected on the lessons learned. Rapid response, careful observation, and collaboration across disciplines had prevented a much larger disaster. Humanity realized that even in the vast emptiness of space, coordination and patience could overcome fear and uncertainty. Every person involved, from pilots to scientists, civilians monitoring signals, had played a part in ensuring survival. The fleet returned to familiar space to find celebrations and gratitude awaiting them. Communities that had feared the unknown now felt safer. Systems once at risk were reinforced. Communication networks were stronger. Humanity had not only survived the threat, but had also grown wiser, better prepared, and more united than ever before. The story of the single colony, the dust cloud, and the hidden attackers became a reminder that danger could appear anywhere, even in the quietest corners of space. But it also reminded everyone that intelligence, patience, and courage could turn fear into understanding and chaos into protection. Humanity had faced the unknown, studied it, and emerged stronger, proving that even in the face of total uncertainty, people could rise together, think carefully, and act wisely. Even years later, historians, scientists, and storytellers spoke of the mission as a turning point. It was remembered not as a tale of destruction, but as a story of learning, vigilance, and human resilience. The single colony's memory inspired every new settlement, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, humanity could find a way to understand, adapt, and survive. The fleet's journey, the discoveries in the dust cloud, and the careful dismantling of the attackers' operations became a foundation for future exploration. Humanity learned to move through space with caution, curiosity, and wisdom. And though the threat had been hidden, the people who faced it knew that preparation, knowledge, and unity could overcome even the most mysterious dangers. In the end, humanity's vengeance was not in destruction, but in revealing the truth, stopping further harm, and ensuring that no colony would ever be targeted in silence again. The lost colony became